The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. We are back. Lovin' baseball when we were 12 and innocent. My guest tonight is the esteemed best-selling author, Peter Golenbock. How are you, sir?
I couldn't be better, Ralph. Could not be better. I had my second vaccine shot last week, and my half-century softball league team is in first place by 4 games, so I couldn't be happier.
Still playing softball.
My 26th year.
43 years old and still playing softball.
Damn straight. Absolutely.
How do you do it?
Well, you go to the gym and work out and stay in shape. That's how you do it.
Is your league the Cubs, and what was it that I remember when my uncle moved? Kids and the Cubs.
Yes, they're 75 to 106. The half century is 49 to 75.
Oh, and you're still playing in the half century, of course, because you're
I'm not 75 yet.
Right. Just our ages are exactly the same, and that leads us to this offering, which is going to stay positive in the sense that with all the world's turmoil, I find that my guests get an awful lot of enjoyment of just putting themselves in the position when they were 12 years old, the year before your bar mitzvah, when you're just a kid and not expected to be a man, when your passions meet your intellect in terms of understanding the game. At 12, our thought process is enough that we know what's going on. And put yourself at 12 for a while, Peter, and what comes to mind?
I was the captain of the orange team, or it might have been the buff team. I was at Camp Winawkee during the summer, 1958. I was the captain of our softball team. Our softball team, over the years, I was on the team that won the 100th game in a row. Winawkee was quite a power. Over 6 or 7 years, we won 100 games in a row. Andy Epstein was the pitcher on that team. I was the first baseman.
Was it a fast pitch? Was it a fast pitch softball?
Fast pitch softball. Oh yeah, fast pitch softball.
Okay,
definitely. Yeah, as fast as a 12-year-old could pitch it.
Right. Not just lobbing it in like most people think is softball.
Not at all. Oh no, not at all. And at the end of the season, I was voted the captain of the buff team, and we won the color war, and it was still one of the highlights of my life. And then after that, of course, the Yankees went on to play in the World Series against the Milwaukee Braves. We were down 3-1 against Spahn and who was the other great pitcher they had? Spahn
Lou Burdette.
Lou Burdette, exactly right.
Yeah.
We had lost to the Braves in the World Series in 1957, which caused me not to eat for about 2 weeks. But then in '58 we came back and we won the last 3 games in a row, so that I could eat during the winter. It worked out.
They were some incredibly great Yankee and Brave teams in the sense that they were so evenly matched up and competitive against one another. I think of all the Yankee, Dodger, and Giant great teams in the 50s and what have you.
Yep.
The Braves were right up there as good as any. They had Matthews and Aaron and Spahn for starters.
Yeah. Not
and
bad
the
Yankees
at all. And the Yankees had Yogi and Mickey and Hank Bauer and Whitey Ford.
And Billy. Yep.
Yeah.
They
think Billy was gone. If you're thinking of Billy Martin,
was gone. Yeah, Billy was gone. Billy was gone. Unfortunately, traded away to Kansas City. But theirs was a terrific team. Tom Sturdivant.
The Yankees had Enos Slaughter, and
they got him. They got Enos late in the season. In 1956, George Weiss called in Phil Rizzuto. It was the day of the Old Timers Day. And he said to Phil, we have to drop one of the players because we need a spot on the roster. We're going to get Enos Slaughter. Who do you think we should drop? And so poor Phil went through a couple of their relief pitchers, and Weiss said no. And there were a couple backup infielders, and Weiss said no. And slowly Phil figured out that the guy they wanted to drop was him. And it crushed him. I mean, Phil had been playing since 1941, something like that. And it was just, terrible. But Phil was very smart. Instead of telling Weiss what a son of a bitch he was, instead of, screaming at him, he kept his mouth shut and he drove home quietly. And it wasn't very much long after that a bunch of teams were interested in Phil doing their announcing. One on the West Coast, and Phil did not want to go to the West Coast. Baltimore was another one. And at that point, the Yankees decided, well, I don't want Phil Rizzuto doing the announcing on the TV and radio for other teams. Let's keep him ourselves. And they hired Phil, and Phil was the Yankee announcer for the next 1,000,000 years.
Well, Peter, I listen to a lot of old games on YouTube. They've got these, you just plug it in, Yankees on the radio in those days. I get to hear Barber, I get to hear Mel Allen, I get to hear everyone. Phil Rizzuto, before he became a caricature of himself, really, as an announcer, was as good as any. His voice was delightful. His enthusiasm was right there. He loved the Yankees. He was a great announcer.
He was delightful.
And
Phil was delightful. I have a book coming out next spring called Whispers of the Gods, and he's one of the players I interviewed for it. It's going to be a sequel to The Glory of Their Times. Phil is one of the people who's interviewed in it, and you'll see just what an absolute delightful person that he was. Lived to be, 90, 99? Close
to. No, I don't think that long, but...
Not long, 94, 95, something like that. But just
with the exception
wonderful...
of Mickey and Roger, a lot of these guys live a long life.
They did.
Bobby Brown, who you and I interviewed 3 or 4 years ago, is still hanging in there.
Yes, he is. Yes, he is.
So,
I know.
I think
not many of them are left.
Robinson. No, Aaron Robinson is one of the few.
Aaron Robinson, wow.
A backup catcher in the days when the Yankees supplied the league with catchers. Gus Triandos, Sherm Lawler.
That's right.
I saw on YouTube a tremendous testimonial the other day to Mickey Mantle, and it was done in the era of that you first introduced yourself to the baseball world. I can't think of his name. The owner of CBS. When he bought the Yankees.
CBS? Well, Mike Burke. Mike Burke was the guy.
Mike Burke of CBS. When he bought, and he put on this tremendous get-together where 12 of of Mickey's teammates, one from each year that he won a championship. Joe DiMaggio honored him, and Peter, they cheered for him for 13 straight minutes. They just on and on and on. And I know you missed it because you were at camp, and I was at summer camp as well. The only bad thing about our summer camp, respective summer camp experiences, we missed Yankee Old Timers days all those years. And can you tell me again about the Yankees under Mike Burke, and because
Sure.
it was such a key time, the transition from Topping and Webb to Burke, and I know you have a general idea of why they went downhill through those years.
I have a specific idea why they went downhill.
I thought you might. I thought you might.
Around 1960, Del Webb and Dan Topping, who were the owners of the Yankees, they were getting older, and they knew that they were about ready to sell the team. And so for the next few years, they didn't spend on the minor leagues what they should have. So when CBS bought the Yankees from Webb and Topping, what they did not realize was that the minor league system was barren. There was almost nobody there. There were a couple of guys. Mel Stottlemyre ended up being pretty good. Al Downing came, and he was pretty good. But when the big guys started to retire, Fritz was there. But when the big guys started retiring in 1964, 65, 66, there was absolutely nobody to replace them. And so, in a way, CBS was taken by Topping and Webb, because Burke, who loved the game of baseball, who loved the Yankees, just took it for granted that this, the 14 pennants in 16 years, which ended in 1964, would go on forever, without doing any research. Because if he had done the research, he would have discovered that they were going to be really royally screwed. And so by 1966, 65, they were terrible. 66, they were in last place. They were just awful. And it took a while for Lee MacPhail, who was the general manager under Mike Burke, to rebuild the team. And the irony, of course, was by 1973, which was the year in January of 73. I was there at the Yankees at the time doing my research for Dynasty. Steinbrenner came in. He and Burke bought the team from CBS at that time. And the idea was going to be that Mike Burke was going to run it, and George Steinbrenner was going to stay in Cleveland and run his shipbuilding company in Cleveland. At least that's what George said. And at the time, the Yankees, I believe, was second or third place team. They weren't that far behind. Free agency hadn't come in yet, and so it was incredibly difficult to build your team in any other way but through your farm system. And so, come 76, 77, when the Yankees were able to buy Reggie Jackson, the Yankees were able to buy Catfish Hunter, George Steinbrenner looked like a savior, because the Yankees under Michael Burke had not been champions during their entire reign.
Was Burke a well-intended guy? Did he?
He was a prince. He was a prince of a guy. He was a lovely, lovely man. He loved books. He loved music. He invited poets to throw out the first ball. He invited ballet dancers to throw out the first ball. He invited these people to come sit with him in the owner's box. And it was interesting because as soon as Steinbrenner came in, he told Burke, "You get rid of these people. Kick them all out. We don't want any of these people hanging around." And it wasn't more than about 6 weeks after that where Burke decided, "I can't work with this guy. I'm going to retire and go to Scotland and live."
Right, and he did that. He was able to pull the plug.
He did.
And he came out financially okay.
Yeah, no, he did okay. Yeah, he did perfectly fine. But it was interesting. I mean, when I came to do Dynasty, Mike Burke wrote a letter for me. Dear Yankee, this guy who you've never heard of is writing a book on the Yankees. Would you please give him your full cooperation? I still have the letter. It's unbelievable. And I sent it out to each one of the Yankees, and as a result, I was literally able to to interview every single Yankee except Joe DiMaggio, who, of course, didn't want anybody asking him about Marilyn Monroe, so he ran for the hills.
And ironically, you were the kind of guy that wouldn't have asked about Marilyn Monroe.
No, I had no interest in that.
I mean, you certainly wouldn't have led with it.
No, I wouldn't have even finished with it. I literally didn't care. I mean, this was something that happened in 1954, for crying out loud, 3 years after he stopped as a player.
Right.
I hung a couple times during Old Timers.
You weren't trying to get trash on when you wrote the book. It was all upbeat. There was nothing negative that you were trying to get trash on anybody. You wrote a wonderful book.
Oh, I mean, when the owners,
wonderful book,
when the owners,
or 10.
Yeah, well, when the owners were doing stupid things, I wrote about the stupid things that the owners did. I mean, these players were
not to trash
wonderful
them,
people.
not deliberately to trash them, of course.
There was nothing to trash. They won 14 pennants in 16 years. What are you going to trash? Nothing to trash.
But I mean, the players as individuals, or this, that, and the other thing. Like some books are written deliberately to put the players in a bad light, or this, that, and the other thing. I'm just paying you a compliment, Peter.
Well, thank you. I will accept your compliment. You're very kind.
Thank you. Tell me what your loss of 12-year-old innocence entailed towards baseball. How did you? I'm
still 12 years old. What do you mean, my loss of innocence? I've never lost my innocence.
Okay,
what are you talking about?
That's a great answer. That's a great answer.
I will tell you one thing. When I was 10 years old, and I think I told you this before, in 1956, my Uncle Justin took me to the World Series to see the Yankees play the Brooklyn Dodgers. And my uncle was Jackie Robinson's lawyer. So after the game, this was the game that Sturdivant won right before Larson's perfect game. After the game, he brought me down to talk business with Jackie Robinson. And as a 10-year-old, I had the opportunity to meet this incredibly large, hulking guy. I never forgot.
And did Billy Martin work with him as well? Because I remember something that why the strict rivalry between Billy Martin, the World Series rivalry, and Jackie Robinson, and what motivated Billy. Was there something, did they have the same person represent them, or?
No, they had the same personality.
No. Driving to
nothing
win.
To do with, no, they had the same personality. That's what that was all about. There was nobody representing the two of them. No. Hardly that. No. I mean, Robinson was just as much of a battler and a piss you off if I have to kind of a guy as Billy was.
Yeah. In 56, in that World Series, I came home from school and watched the final innings of that with my mother, who it turns out in 1939 went to Lou Gehrig Day as a 19-year-old kid and remembered that day vividly. And we were talking baseball for like the first time. Her dad was my grandfather, who took me to all the games and introduced me. I didn't realize that she had a passion until then herself. And we watched Yogi jump into Don Larson's arms, and that was. But I didn't know you might have been at that game.
No, I was at the game before that. I was at the game where Sturdivant beat the great Dodger pitcher who's still alive.
Carl Erskine.
Carl Erskine beat Carl Erskine 4-2. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that was the game before that.
Wonderful days. Tell me about how you tingled at a World Series game at age 10. That had to be so cool.
Oh, absolutely, it was cool. But I was one of those guys who took everything that he did for granted. I expected to be treated this way. I was the prince. So.
Yes,
you know what I'm talking
I know
about?
that.
Yeah.
Oh, do I ever being the prince or thinking of yourself as a prince?
Right.
It's a pleasure to be spoiled in that way. If one is not, one cannot explain that feeling of themselves. And
that's absolutely true.
And you lived up to it. It's the people like me who.
That's right. When you're the prince, you have to live up to it.
That's right, or at least aspire to it. Or that.
No, you don't aspire to it. This is nothing you aspire to. This is who you are.
Yeah, that says a lot about Peter Golenbock, really. Peter, is it not necessarily in sports, but in life, was there anyone that you ever met that you were absolutely silenced by or flabbergasted or just were in awe of, couldn't speak, couldn't say the right thing? Anybody in the world?
All sorts of people, but I can't tell you off the top of my head. Right now, I would need to really have to think about that. But John Hope Franklin was a friend of mine. John Hope Franklin, who was this spectacular educator, African American, who wrote the history of, he was the guy who started with the Black Lives Matter and why it mattered. Spectacular person. I wrote a book called In the Country of Brooklyn, which was about liberal Brooklyn. And a lot of the people who I met interviewing for that book, I was just awed by because they were heroes. These were people who fought the racism, who fought the anti-Semitism. These are, people who rooted for Jackie Robinson in Brooklyn when everybody else wanted him dead. You find that in the country of Brooklyn. Just about everybody who I interviewed in that book was heroic in one way or another.
Is there any other city but Brooklyn who Jackie could have succeeded? Jackie and Branch Rickey could have succeeded as easily, not that it was easy, as they did.
The only other place where he might have succeeded would have been with the Cleveland Indians with Bill Veeck. That's the only other shot that he had, where Bill Veeck would have protected him, but nowhere else. Absolutely nowhere else. When you see what Jackie Robinson went through, even in the minor leagues playing for Montreal, when he'd play in places like Baltimore or some of these southern cities, where they at one point threatened to hang him. They had to get him out of town because they were going to kill him. because he was a black man playing with white players.
Jackie's wife gave you a terrific interview for Bums.
She certainly did. She made the whole book.
Yeah. Is there anything in particular that stuck out from that? I mean, it was all great, but is there anything that she said that made you just stop and go, wow?
Yeah. Oh, plenty of things. But the thing really more than anything else is that when she and Jackie were flying from Pasadena to spring training, that first spring training, they had to go through New Orleans. And so they flew to New Orleans and they got off the plane and they had to get on another plane to fly to Florida. And what happened is every time it was their turn to go, if there was a white couple who wanted to get on the plane, they would get left off and the white couple would get back on. And this happened 2 or 3 different flights. And finally they said, the hell with this, we better grab a bus or we're never going to get there. In California, they never faced the racism that they faced in the South. And that's the thing that really struck me. They had no idea what they were about to experience.
How about the players that came after Jackie in terms of racism? The Frank Robinsons and the Aarons and the Mays and what have you.
Funny thing you should say that. That's the book I always wanted to write and never did. And now it's too late. I interviewed Monty Irvin. I interviewed him for my Brooklyn book. And the reason for that was he was living in Ocala, and I picked him up and drove him to St. Petersburg, where we were part of a panel to talk baseball. And during the trip, I asked him if I could interview him. And he proceeded to tell me that Branch Rickey had actually asked him before asking Jackie whether he would come and play for the Dodgers, which he had never told anybody that. And what he told me was that as a result of being in World War II and being under these white Southern officers, that he was treated so terribly and had such enmity and hatred for these white guys that he told Rickey, I'm sorry, I'm not ready. I can't do this. And so
can't turn the other cheek. That's what Rickey asked Jackie to do.
Right. I can't. Not only that, he knew what was coming. He knew the racism and the hatred that was going to come his way, and he told Rickey, I just can't handle it. I can't do it. I'll let you know when I can. And when he could was something like 2 or 3 years later. And at that point, he was playing for the Newark Giants, and Mrs. Manley owned the Giants, and she wanted, I don't know, $15,000 from Rickey, and Rickey said no, and so she ended up selling Monty to the Giants for that same $15,000.
Whoa.
Yep.
I'm living and learning. Peter, thank you for sharing as usual.
Oh, you're welcome.
And you will be featured in an upcoming book that I'm writing with George Grimm called Comfortably Zoned in a Vat o' Pine Tar. And only a true baseball fan may understand what that is, but you are certainly swimming around in a vat of pine tar, if ever there was one. You've been a boon to this radio network, and I love you for it, Peter. Thank you so much.
Thanks. It's certainly my pleasure. You take care.
We'll keep talking, and you.
Right.
Yes, that's it. You got your off the air. We're talking. You got your second shot.
I got my second shot. Yep, I did.
Now, what does that entail? Can you get?
That entails on Valentine's Day going to a Vietnamese restaurant for dinner. That's what that entails.
Okay, but you still have to be safe with masks in this and that. Am I correct?
I'm not sure. I wear it because you look like an idiot when you don't, but I'm not sure that that's so. Supposedly I'm protected.
Sei gesund, my friend. We'll talk
Yeah.
soon.
All right. Take care, Ralph.
Thank you for listening, everybody. Lovin' baseball when we were 12 and innocent. I'm Ralph Tycho, Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. Happy trails.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned Network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.